Okay, for our last part of Chapter 2, we're going to be looking at the Carolinas. So, the Carolinas are important because they are actually fairly unique from some of the other colonies. And there are some important events that are happening in England during this period. So, first off, in the 1640s, there's going to be a civil war in England. King Charles I dismisses Parliament in 1629, and he basically, of course, this means more power for the king. Well, by 1640, they've been angry, they're outspoken, he's worried about rebellion, he calls Parliament back together. By that point, Parliament says, we need to get rid of Charles I, we don't want him to have all the power, in fact, we want Parliament to have more power. And so Parliament is going to look to a guy who actually was a Puritan by the name of Oliver Cromwell. And they'll actually eventually behead Charles in 1649. Cromwell will take control of England for about a decade. And then Charles II, who is the son of Charles I, will eventually be restored to the throne. But what this did, this whole period of war, known as the Restoration period, basically what you're going to see here is that during the war, colonization kind of gets put on hold because there's so much chaos in England. But in 1660, after the Civil War is over and Charles II is restored to the throne, England is going to turn its attention back to the colonies, and Charles II is going to grant property to 8 of his favorite individuals in court, and these guys become known as Lord Proprietors, meaning that they are kind of the proprietors of a proprietary colony. And basically what they're going to do is name these colonies Carolina after King Charles. And these guys are hoping that they're going to basically make money off of selling food to sugar plantations in Barbados, and then export stuff like wine, silk, and olive oil. And so what's going to happen here is you are going to see rice emerge as one of the primary export crops in the Carolinas. And this is mainly due to the climate. There are going to be Indians who are also in the area in the Carolinas that they're going to have to deal with. For instance, you're going to see Savannah Indians who are going to migrate to the backcountry of Maryland and Pennsylvania, where you're going to have a colony, Pennsylvania colony founded there by William Penn with the Quakers, where the relationship with the natives was much better than in a lot of the other colonies. So you'll see natives start to leave the area and go elsewhere. The other thing, too, that you're going to see are some busy ports. For instance, Charlestown, which is going to be an extremely busy port in the south, which you can actually go to Charlestown. It's about 10-15 minutes or so west of Charleston. And you can go there and see kind of the remains of the colony, and they have some stuff set up that you can kind of try to get a feel for what it was like there at the Charlestown colony. But because it's such a successful and busy seaport, this means that a lot of very wealthy people will be based in Charleston. And so it's going to have kind of an aristocratic type atmosphere in Charleston. It's also going to be incredibly diverse. So you're going to have French Protestants, Jews, and other people. Because it's so diverse and aristocratic, there's going to be a degree of religious toleration. The Spanish are going to basically try to get Indians to attack people in the Carolinas, and then you'll even have some Spanish soldiers who will kind of come through the area to try and incite violence. But for the most part, the Carolina colonies will be too strong for the Spanish to wipe out by the time they realize it's too late. Okay, so here you can see a kind of a list. This could help with your graphic organizer a little bit, so it'd be something maybe to look at. Now, North Carolina is unique because North Carolina is going to come about because to the north you have Virginia, and in Virginia you have an older established colony. A lot of people owned large plantations growing tobacco, and the Church of England was the dominant church in Virginia, though religion kind of took second place to economics in Virginia. South Carolina, on the other side, was much more aristocratic, and you had very large rice plantations, and so North Carolina, kind of wedged in the center there, is going to be inhabited by people who were usually called squatters, and these were people who didn't actually have legal rights to the soil that they were setting up their farms on. And these people came because they didn't really fit into the really kind of wealthy stratified society of Virginia, and they didn't fit into the kind of aristocratic society of South Carolina. So the people in North Carolina generally kind of poor. A lot of them also were looking for some sort of freedom from the Church of England. So there were also religious reasons why people in North Carolina. And so North Carolina, like I said, is going to be somewhat unique to the Virginia and South Carolina area there. There are not also going to be a large number of African slaves in North Carolina until much later. There are going to be confrontations with native groups in the area. For instance, the Tuscarora Indians, which are going to attack New Bern in 1711. And usually when this would happen, the North and South Carolinians would kind of band together to fight a common enemy. This results in the Tuscarora War, where after they defeat the Tuscarora Indians, they end up selling a lot of them into slavery, where the rest of them flee northward, and they actually end up joining kind of the Iroquois Confederacy, and this becomes the sixth nation of the Iroquois Confederacy. So there's an early map, and you can kind of see the North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia settlements. The other thing, too, you can kind of compare North Carolina to Rhode Island. Technically, these were probably the most democratic of the colonies in terms of the people were able to form laws and assemblies. Also the most independent-minded, mainly because it was more free from kind of the rule of England and the Church of England, and it was definitely the least aristocratic of the original 13 colonies. And then here's the Tuscarora War, which I discussed, and the Yamasee Indians in South Carolina, which was also another war. And once the Yamasee Indians are going to be defeated, you'll see a lot of the coastal Indian tribes pretty much retreat back to the Appalachian Mountains, where you have the Cherokees, the Creeks, and the Iroquois Indians. And basically, these people who are kind of hiding out in the Appalachian Mountains will hold on much longer than Indians who are living on the coast. Okay, the other thing here is Georgia. Georgia is a very unique colony. Georgia was originally founded as a buffer between the Spanish Empire to the south in places like Florida and the Carolina colonies. And so Georgia was supposed to be kind of almost like a protection against the Spanish. But what happens here is the people who are put in charge of this colony are philanthropists. And what they want to do is they want to create a colony that would be a haven for debtors, because the debtors' prisons in England were overflowing. And a lot of people felt, particularly these philanthropists, that some of these people in debtors' prison, it was unjust, and that these people were unjustly imprisoned. And so Georgia would be a place where these debtors could go to kind of work off their debt and start a new life. James Oglethorpe is going to be kind of the leader of these guys to kind of get this going. Oglethorpe will also be interested in prison reform. He is also going to kind kind of try to get rid of the consumption of alcohol in the Georgia colony. And everyone except Catholics also was able to have some sort of religious toleration in the Georgia colonies. And so the point is, Georgia is kind of like an experiment colony here. But because it's kind of rugged and you have the Spanish to the south and pretty large groups of Indians, it's going to grow very slowly. John Wesley, who is going to be an important founder of the Methodist Church, will serve as a missionary in Georgia, and he'll kind of experience kind of how Georgia grew and also help formulate this idea, trying to keep Georgia from having slaves, trying to keep Georgia from having alcohol. But of course, eventually slavery will be introduced to Georgia. Okay, so lastly here is what we're seeing are these large plantation economies that are forming in the South. What you'll see here is mainly tobacco and rice being exported from these very large plantations. This will also mean that the plantations become reliant on slavery in order to grow more and more, to make more and more profit. In the South, there's also going to be some geographic isolation, which will lead to the slow growth of cities. And in a lot of the southern colonies, you will see a decent amount of religious toleration, and that's mainly because they focus more on the economy as opposed to religion. And these colonies, their boundaries are not really that defined. And so you'll also see that these colonies will expand geographically and get bigger. And then just some information about the Iroquois Confederacy. There's a section in your book that you need to kind of make sure that you look at to understand, because the Iroquois Confederacy will be very strong. And of course they'll lose a lot of power after the Revolutionary War, but they are going to be very important in the sense that they are going to resist the colonies, both the English and the French, for quite a long time, and will be responsible for lots of raids and violence, especially on the frontiers. And that pretty much concludes Chapter 2.